Hi, I'm Caleb Sheirer. I was part of discussion group 4 this semester for History 354, excuse me. I'll be talking about the French Revolution today for a final project, and let's go ahead and begin. France, just before the Revolution, was experiencing a period marked by really intense poverty. Food and work were really hard to come by for people living in the city especially, but life in the countryside was just a little bit better. Pollution was a problem, and just public health in general, especially in the city, was a big problem. But conversely, the monarchy, the nobles, the clergy, they were really well off. They didn't have any problems with any kind of economic necessities, and when you compared them against the average population, there was a huge gap between the two parties. And in a lot of ways, this is really kind of similar to the Russian Revolution in the early 1900s. And this economic gap is actually one of the biggest factors in why the revolution actually happened at all. So the nobles, and especially the monarchy, spent a lot of time away from the large cities, so they weren't really, they didn't have the greatest idea of how things really were in the cities. So, they spent a lot of time in Versailles or in the big churches, things like that. So that was another big problem. They didn't really have an idea of, what their subjects or, the people that they were supposed to be, leading effectively were really experiencing. So during this same period, the Enlightenment was occurring, and it focused on philosophy and the use of logic to increase, liberty, tolerance, all that good stuff, and progressiveness. So the philosophers like Voltaire, Rousseau, and Diderot in France were really responsible for the dissemination of ideas and, things that, would lead the average people of France toward revolution. And they tended to speak in salons, there were, a bunch of these throughout France, and they were areas where, intellectuals could come and they could discuss their ideas with other intellectuals. And usually the contents of these discussions would spread by word of mouth, throughout to the people. And they were really able to get an idea of what these philosophers stood for and, how this could relate to them. So probably one of the biggest influences of the philosophers in the French Revolution was The Social Contract by Rousseau, which asserts that physical and civil freedoms are really something that should be universal, and that political authority should really only come from a social contract between the ruled and the rulers. So the revolution itself began with the storming of the Bastille, which occurred in 1789, and after that point, the National Assembly was created, and they worked to establish the Declaration of the Rights of Man, similar to our Bill of Rights, which actually influenced it quite a bit. And they also worked to transition France to a constitutional monarchy under Enlightenment ideals, and Censer and Hunt said that in their Liberty, Equality, and Fraternity. So the constitutional monarchy really wasn't much of a success, and in 1793, the king, Louis XVI, was sentenced to die by guillotine by the revolutionaries under the leader Robespierre. And later in that same year, the Committee of Public Safety, which again was headed by Robespierre, he was probably one of the most influential leaders in the revolution. He began the most infamous part of the revolution, which we know, of course, today is the Terror. The Terror itself was a period where there was a lot of discontent with how things were going in France, and people didn't necessarily have the greatest idea of how their new system should go. And you could really see that with, the mass executions of people who, might have been seen as counter-revolutionary, which was a big thing, or maybe as supporters of the monarchy. During this period, you really wanted to be sure that your neighbor, even your son sometimes, well, less often, but especially your neighbors, didn't think that you were part of those counter-revolutionary groups. And it really was more than just political and economic. Censer and Hunt say that one of the main goals of the terror was to republicanize everything, and that it was actually more of a cultural revolution than anything else. So again, you could be targeted for execution, you could be thrown in prison. It was just a rough time to be around in France. And despite the massive importance that the Reign of Terror seems to get today, at least, by scholars and anything like that, it actually lasted for really only a year, and came to an end with the fall of Robespierre. People within the government and at large were really unhappy with how he was ruling. Not ruling, because he wasn't a leader, he was part of a committee, but with the way that he was influencing things, and he was executed by a guillotine without trial at all. So that was the end of the terror. That was finally done. People are still not thrilled because economically France is still in rough shape, and there's still a lot of food problems that people are having. There's still not necessarily famine, but food is expensive. So the final period of the revolution, which occurred from 1795 to 1799, saw the full transition of France finally to a full republic, away from the failed constitutional monarchy and the monarchy itself, with elective leaders. And Censer and Hunt stated that aristocracy, which was a big part of France prior to the revolution, based on rank and birth and all of that, was finally replaced with civil equality and promotion based on merit, similar to what we have today. It was the full transition away from feudalism toward a more democratic and republican society. And the end of the revolution itself is really kind of still debated, but it's of my personal opinion, at least, that the revolution ended with the rise of Napoleon as the Emperor of France. And that about sums it up. Thanks for watching, and I hope you at least learned a little bit.